It's commendable, Assemblyman, you're bringing something forward that I know that your intentions are to protect immigrants, and I have a lot of immigrants that work in the Coachella Valley. That's one of the breadbasket portions of the state of California. And what I've seen since President Trump has been elected by the Assembly and by the Senate is, frankly, rebellion. They're upset. And I understand that everybody's upset on the other side of the aisle that he got elected. And certainly we can have all this vigorous debate on the floor of the Assembly and the floor of the Senate, and either condemning or supporting what this president is doing. But I think what's unfortunate is that we're drawing in the private sector in legislation. We just saw it on the Senate floor, where if any contractor in the state of California even does any work on the proposed wall that's going to be built, whether we support it or we don't support it, they will be blackballed from any state contracts in perpetuity. So we've kind of drawn them into the immigration discussion. Now, my concern in a state that doesn't have the best reputation for being business friendly is adding another notch to that business unfriendliness, because these employers have appropriately, in I would say most cases, filed their I-9s, and now we're trying to pass a law that is in direct conflict with federal law. And so these employers have to decide, do I want to pay the federal fines or do I want to pay the state fines, including PAGA, which can be very, very expensive, and that's why I think you see the extensive opposition on this bill, which is pretty long, including many chambers of commerce that are concerned for their members. So I'm concerned about the noticing requirements. I'm also concerned about redirecting the efforts of the labor commissioner that should be looking at wage issues, and we're drawing them into this when we have such a large underground economy right now that the labor commissioner should be focusing on, and making sure we put these underground economies out of business, if you will, and being fully transparent about what they're doing. And then I also worry, Assemblyman, that if you have an employer that's not being cooperative with a federal agency, one thing I've learned is if you don't cooperate, if the State Board of Pharmacy comes in and they want to see certain records and I ask them for a subpoena, that's not going to be met well by the inspector. And my 3-hour inspection will probably turn into a 2-day inspection, and they're going to try to find anything they possibly can. My worry is that we may be hurting immigrants by not fully cooperating, because you're going to be getting, whether it's legal or illegal, intended or unintended, over scrutinization that could hurt employees of these companies. And so, how can we do this in such a way that we're not putting our businesses in a pickle, where they're penalized if they make one decision and not following federal law, and then they'll be penalized if they don't follow state law when they're in direct conflict with one another? And how can we modify these noticing requirements to be a little bit greater than 24 hours to give these employers that have multiple work sites at least the ability to try to comply with this law if it were in fact to become law, so that they aren't subjected to these very expensive PAGA lawsuits?
So I know you've sort of laid out a number of objections and issues. Let me first start by saying, yes, I think many of us on our side of the aisle are upset with this presidential administration with regards to how they're treating our immigrant communities. And this is different from when prior Republican presidents came into effect, because this is a president who has decided in his campaign and after the campaign to go after our immigrant communities, and in fact to go after our immigrant communities in unconstitutional ways, with executive orders that have been found by multiple federal courts in our country to be unconstitutional. And fundamentally, this bill is about ensuring that if there is going to be a worksite raid, that it is conducted legally. As you know, under federal regulations, ICE inspections and ICE raids are supposed to be consistent with our United States Constitution. Mm-hmm. But in the past, that has not been the case, and we fully anticipate that with 10,000 new ICE agents, that will not be the case moving forward. And so I think it's important to understand what this bill is trying to achieve, which is to ensure that our employers are not coerced in being involved in unconstitutional and illegal rates. Employers across the state of California are receiving the advice that they can and should ask for a subpoena or a judicial warrant when an employee, when ICE comes knocking. If you as an employer were to find at the door of your office an ICE agent who said, I want to come in and inspect your premises, your work site, and ask for the confidential information of your employees, I suspect the first thing you would ask for is the paperwork to show that they are able to do what they do. That is simply what this bill is about. Now, I know there's been some suggestion that simply by asking that may anger an ICE agent who comes along. I would suggest if this bill doesn't pass and an employer is trying to exercise their constitutional rights, that ICE agent would be far more furious with that individual than if the employer can point to the state law and says, you know, I'm sorry, but I have to ask you for a judicial warrant. I have to ask you for a subpoena. You asked also why we've involved the labor commissioner. At the end of the day, the authority and duty of a labor commissioner is to ensure the protection of the rights of workers. And we believe, and this is the perspective that those of us who support this bill have, is that this administration does not care for the constitutional rights of either employers or their employees. And that is fundamentally what this is about. So I hope that answers some of your questions. Obviously, respectfully, we may not see eye to eye on this, but that is certainly the perspective.
No, I appreciate what you're trying to accomplish. Again, I represent large immigrant communities. My concern is that we have a lot of businesses that are going to be torn as to whether to comply with the new state law and with existing federal law. We may have some differences on how federal law is administered. I think you may be looking more prospectively than retrospectively, and understanding that, you know, although immigration was not a prominent issue that our former president undertook in his presidency, he did deport more immigrants than any other president in recent history. And he did it under the radar, and therefore it didn't become the political melodrama that we're seeing here today. But I still believe that businesses need to comply with all laws that are constitutionally written on the books. They got to comply with I-9s, and they got to comply with inspections where you have a federal official that wants to come in and see these I-9s and the respective personnel that are reflective in those applications. I don't think that's an unreasonable request. And I just worry with all the business groups here are extensive, and they're concerned about being put in the pickle that I spoke about, and they're being concerned about, again, facing more litigation, more PAGA lawsuits. And so my hope is that you'll continue to work with the opposition to try to negate that possibility as it becomes another tax, if you will, in doing business in the state of California, which doesn't have the stellar reputation that other states do. And I hope that you'll continue your discussions with the opposition.
And I know, I think we might have a little bit of a difference of opinion on the so-called business unfriendliness climate of the sixth largest economy in the world, which is the state of California. Our economy is actually doing quite well. And I think the concern at this time is that the Trump administration is going to be sending an ICE agents into industries that have relied on immigrant workers. And for that matter, workers who have been denied documentation because of Donald Trump and his congressional Republican allies. And I know you've mentioned you have a lot of immigrant workers in your district. Mm-hmm. As you know, in the state of California, it's estimated in our agriculture community, close to half of our workers may not have the documentation that we need, and yet we have a very robust agriculture industry. Our trades industry, 20% is estimated to be undocumented. Our restaurant industry, 30% is estimated to be undocumented. Those are incredibly successful sectors, and the Trump administration is threatening the viability of those sectors with illegal, potentially unconstitutional searches. You referenced the Obama administration and their deportation rates. I would ask you to take a look at the Trump administration in the first few months. They are on path to blowing way past the numbers that you alluded to with the Obama administration, and that is what I think we're concerned about, an administration that has shown zero regard to the Constitution when it comes to enforcement of the laws. This is not about saying that there should not be workplace raids. This bill is about saying there should not be illegal workplace raids that violate the Constitution and the rights that employers have to be able to say, do you have a subpoena, do you have a warrant as is required by federal regulations?
I agree with you. I'm not trying to suggest in any way that any agency, federal or state, should be not complying with the Constitution of the United States or the state of California. And what I keep hearing, the common denominator is Trump, and that's what I've been hearing since January the 8th. And I don't have a problem with having debate about the president and the merits of his presidency and the unpopular stances that he's taken during his campaign and during the election. My objection is that the legislature now is trying to bring in the private sector, the business community, and put them in a pickle, or tell them they can't do business with the federal government if it in any way conflicts with this legislature's viewpoints on the president's viewpoint on immigration issues. So we'll agree to disagree on some of these issues. I understand the point of what you're trying to do here, and that's to protect the workers. I want to protect the workers too. And you're right, we have the 6th largest economy in the world, and the reason why we do is because we have 40 million people that live in the state of California. It's not because we're so business friendly and businesses are migrating here to the state of California because of our great business environment. I would opine that it's not. So with that, I won't be supporting your bill today, but I hope you work with the opposition.